The rain fell harder than it had in months, the kind of rain that blurred the world into soft gray shapes. Inside Kensington Palace, Captain Marcus Reed stood at attention in the East Wing corridor. His uniform pressed to perfection, his breathing steady. He had guarded the Prince of Wales for 7 years. 7 years without a single mistake. Tonight would be different. Marcus checked his watch. 10 minutes to midnight. The prince was in his private study, finishing paperwork before an international trip scheduled for dawn. Everything was routine. Quiet. Almost too quiet. But then, sound. Faint. A scraping like metal on stone. Marcus turned his head slightly. The sound came again, this time from the service stairwell behind him. His hand moved instinctively to his radio. He hesitated. Protocol said to report everything. But what if it was nothing? What if he called in a false alarm and looked foolish in front of the team? Before you find out what happens next, if you love true stories that grip your heart and keep you on the edge of your seat, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. Marcus made his choice. He moved toward the stairwell door, leaving his post for just a moment. Just to check. The door was old, heavy oak with iron hinges. He pulled it open slowly. Peering down into the darkness, nothing. Just shadows and the smell of damp stone. He was about to close the door when he heard it. Again, louder, closer. Footsteps. Someone was climbing the stairs. Marcus reached for his radio. But before he could speak, a voice crackled through, sharp, urgent. Captain Reed. Return to your post, immediately. His stomach dropped. That was Lieutenant Hayes, head of night security. Marcus turned and ran back down the corridor, his boots echoing against the marble floor. As he rounded the corner, he saw it. The study door was open. It should have been closed. Locked from the inside, but it stood wide open, spilling warm light into the hallway. Marcus's heart hammered in his chest. He approached carefully, his hand on his weapon. Inside, the prince sat at his desk, perfectly calm, signing documents. Lieutenant Hayes stood beside him, arms crossed, her expression cold. Captain Reed, the prince said without looking up. Did you leave your post? Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Sir, I heard a noise. I thought you thought, the prince repeated, his voice quiet but firm. He set down his pen and looked up. His eyes were not angry. They were disappointed, which somehow felt worse. You thought it was appropriate to abandon your duty? No, sir. I apologize. It won't happen again. The prince stood slowly. The room felt smaller suddenly, the air heavier. What Marcus didn't know was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his career, and the consequences were about to unfold in ways he could never have imagined. Asterisk. The silence in the study felt like a weight on Marcus's chest. The prince walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Rain streaked down the glass, distorting the lights of London beyond. 7 years, the prince said softly. 7 years you've stood at that door. Not once have you failed me. Marcus wanted to speak, to defend himself, but the words wouldn't come. Lieutenant Hayes shifted beside him, her face unreadable. Do you know why I chose you as my personal guard? The prince continued. Because you were reliable. Because I could trust you with my life. With my family's lives? Sir, I take full responsibility. Marcus said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. It was a lapse in judgment. The prince turned, his expression grave. A lapse in judgment. Yes, that's exactly what it was. He paused as if weighing his next words carefully. But in our world, Captain Reed, a single lapse can cost lives. Marcus felt his throat tighten. He had known this job came with impossible standards, but he had always believed he could meet them. Tonight proved otherwise. Lieutenant Hayes stepped forward. Your Highness, if I may, Captain Reed has an exemplary record. Perhaps a formal reprimand, no? The prince said firmly. This isn't about punishment, Lieutenant. This is about trust. And trust, once broken, is nearly impossible to repair. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had served this man through threats, through protests, through moments of genuine danger. And now, because of 30 seconds of poor judgment, it was all unraveling. The prince sat back down at his desk, picking up a folder. I'm flying to Geneva at dawn. High-level security talks. The stakes couldn't be higher. He looked up at Marcus. I need someone at my side I can trust absolutely. Without question. Marcus's hands curled into fists at his sides. He understood what was coming. Still, he had to hear it.
Sir, he managed.
I understand. If you need to reassign me, I'm not reassigning you, Captain. The prince's voice was gentle, but unyielding. I'm relieving you of your duties. Effective immediately. The room seemed to tilt. Marcus heard the words, but they felt unreal, like something from a nightmare. Your Highness, please, Lieutenant Hayes interjected. Perhaps we should review the incident more thoroughly before making such a... My decision is final, Lieutenant. I will not board that plane with a guard who has demonstrated he cannot be trusted to hold his post. The prince's gaze returned to Marcus. I'm sorry, Captain Reed. You've served with honor, but this is where it ends. Marcus stood rigid, fighting to keep his composure. 7 years, gone in a moment. His career, his reputation, everything he had worked for, reduced to ash because of one mistake. But what would happen next would reveal that this firing wasn't just about a broken rule. It was about something far more dangerous. Something neither Marcus nor the prince could have predicted. Asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Marcus handed over his weapon and security badge in silence. Each item felt like a piece of himself being torn away. Lieutenant Hayes escorted him out of the study, down the corridor he had walked 1,000 times before. But now everything looked different. Foreign. I'm sorry, Marcus, Hayes said quietly as they reached the security checkpoint. You didn't deserve that? Yes, I did, Marcus replied. His voice was hollow. I broke protocol. I left my post. Hayes shook her head. We all make mistakes. 7 years of perfect service should have counted for something. Not when you're protecting royalty, Marcus said. He signed the discharge papers with a hand that didn't feel like his own. Who's taking over my position? Sergeant Dalton. He's good. Solid record. Marcus nodded. He knew Dalton. Young, eager, capable. Everything Marcus had been 7 years ago. He'll do well. The rain had stopped when Marcus stepped outside. The city air felt cold against his skin. He walked to his car, climbed in, and sat in the darkness for a long time. His phone buzzed. A text from his wife. How's the night shift going? Marcus stared at the words. How could he tell her? How could he explain that everything they had built together, the life they had planned, had just crumbled because he had turned his head for 30 seconds? He drove home in silence. When he arrived, the house was dark except for the porch light Sarah always left on for him. He sat in the driveway, engine running, unable to go inside. His phone rang. Marcus didn't recognize the number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Captain Reed. A man's voice. Urgent. This is Detective Inspector Walsh, Metropolitan Police. I need you to listen very carefully. Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. I'm listening. An hour ago, we arrested a man attempting to break into Kensington Palace through the service entrance. The same entrance connected to the stairwell near your former post? Marcus's blood ran cold. The noise, the scraping sound he had heard. We believe he was planning to reach the prince's study, Walsh continued. He had detailed floor plans, security schedules, and something else. A device. We're still analyzing it, but preliminary reports suggest it's an explosive. The world seemed to stop spinning. Marcus couldn't breathe. I heard him, he whispered. I heard him in the stairwell. That's why I left my post. We know. The suspect claims he heard footsteps and fled. If you hadn't investigated that noise, Captain Reed, he might have reached his target. Marcus sat in stunned silence. His mistake, the very thing that had cost him his career, had potentially saved the prince's life. But the story was far from over. Because the next morning would bring a revelation that would change everything Marcus thought he knew about that night. Marcus barely slept that night. He told Sarah everything. She held him while he spoke, tears streaming down his face as he described the look in the prince's eyes, the weight of the discharge papers, the detective's phone call. "You saved his life," Sarah whispered. "He has to know that now." "It doesn't matter," Marcus said bitterly. "I still broke protocol. I still left my post." At dawn, his phone rang again. "Lieutenant Hayes." "Marcus, are you sitting down?" Her voice was tight, urgent. "What happened?" "The prince knows." "About the intruder?" "About everything." She paused. "He wants to see you now." An hour later, Marcus stood once again in the palace corridors, but this time he wore civilian clothes. No badge, no weapon. Just a man who had lost everything. The prince's study door was open. Inside, the prince stood by the window, hands in his pockets. He looked tired. When he saw Marcus, something shifted in his expression. "Captain Reed," he said quietly. "Please, sit." Marcus remained standing. "With respect, sir, I'm no longer a captain." "No, you're not." The prince moved to his desk, picked up a folder, and held it out. "Detective Walsh briefed me this morning. The suspect had been planning this for months. He knew our security protocols. He knew when shifts changed. He knew everything." Marcus took the folder with shaking hands. Inside were photos of the suspect, detailed floor plans, and a transcript of the interrogation. His eyes caught on one line. "I would have succeeded if the guard hadn't moved. I heard him coming down the stairs. I had to abort." "You saved my life," the prince said softly. "By breaking the very rule I fired you for breaking." Marcus closed the folder, his hands trembling. "I still abandoned my post, sir. I still failed my duty. Did you?" The prince sat on the edge of his desk. "Or did you do exactly what a good guard should do? Trust your instincts. Investigate a threat." "Protocol exists for a reason," Marcus said. "If every guard abandoned their post whenever they heard a noise, then perhaps our protocols need to change." The prince stood. "I was wrong, Captain Reed. I let procedure blind me to judgment, to 7 years of loyal service, to the fact that you are not a robot following orders, but a man with instincts worth trusting." The words hung in the air between them. Marcus felt something breaking open inside his chest. Relief, anger, confusion, all of it at once. "I'm offering you your position back," the prince said. "If you'll take it." Marcus looked at the man he had sworn to protect. The man who had fired him without hesitation. The man who was now asking him to return. And in that moment, Marcus faced a choice that would test everything he believed about duty. Forgiveness and his own self-worth. Asterisk, asterisk, the silence stretched between them. Outside, London was waking up. Traffic hummed in the distance. Birds sang in the palace gardens. Life continued, oblivious to the moment unfolding in this room. "I don't know if I can," Marcus said finally. His voice was raw. "You looked at me last night like I was a stranger, like 7 years meant nothing." The prince's face tightened. "You're right, I did, and I was wrong." He moved closer, his eyes meeting Marcus's directly. "I've spent my entire life surrounded by protocol, rules, expectations. Sometimes I forget that the people serving me are more than their positions. They're human." "I trusted you," Marcus said quietly. "I gave you 7 years of my life. I missed birthdays, holidays, time with my family, all because I believed in what I was doing, and you took it away in seconds." "I know." The prince's voice cracked slightly. "And I can't undo that. But I can ask you to forgive me, not because I'm royalty, but because I'm a man who made a terrible mistake." Marcus felt tears threatening. He fought them back. "If I come back, things need to change." "They will. I promise you that. I need you to trust my judgment. If I hear something, see something, feel something is wrong, I need to know you'll back me, even if it means breaking protocol." The prince nodded slowly. "You have my word, and I'll put it in writing if you need me to." Marcus looked down at his hands. They were steady now. The trembling had stopped. He thought of Sarah, waiting at home. He thought of the years he had given to this job, the pride he had felt wearing the uniform, the purpose it had given him. He thought of the intruder, caught because Marcus had trusted his instincts. "I need to talk to my wife," Marcus said finally. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Marcus turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "Sir, can I ask you something?" "Anything? Why did you really fire me? Was it just about the protocol? Or was it something more?" The prince was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I was afraid. My father taught me that showing emotion is weakness, that the moment you let your guard down, people will take advantage. When I saw that door open, when I realized you had left your post, I panicked. Not because you had failed, but because I realized how much I relied on you, how much I trusted you, and that terrified me." Marcus felt something shift inside him. Understanding? Maybe. Or at least the beginning of it. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said. "Either way, you'll have your answer." He drove home through morning traffic, his mind racing. When he walked through the door, Sarah was waiting. She took one look at his face and knew. "He offered you the job back," she said. Marcus nodded. They sat together at the kitchen table, hands clasped, talking through everything. The pain, the fear, the uncertainty, and by the time the sun set, Marcus knew what he had to do. But making the call would be one of the hardest things he had ever done. Asterisk, the next morning. Marcus stood once again outside Kensington Palace. This time, he wore his uniform. The same uniform he had turned in just 2 days ago. It felt different now. Heavier somehow. More meaningful. Lieutenant Hayes met him at the gate. She smiled, a real smile. "Welcome back, Captain." "Good to be back," Marcus said. And he meant it. The prince was waiting in his study. When Marcus entered, the prince stood and extended his hand. Not a formal gesture, but a genuine one. "Thank you," the prince said simply, "for giving me another chance." Marcus shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for giving me mine." Over the following weeks, things slowly returned to normal, but not exactly the same normal as before. The prince made good on his promise. New protocols were established, giving guards more autonomy to act on their instincts. Training programs were updated. And most importantly, a new level of trust was built between the royal family and the people who protected them. Marcus stood at his post one rainy evening. 3 months after his return, the corridor was quiet. He heard a sound from the service stairwell. His hand moved to his radio. This time he didn't hesitate. He called it in, investigated, and discovered a maintenance worker who had gotten lost trying to fix a leak. A false alarm. But protocol had been followed. Trust had been maintained. When his shift ended that night, the prince stopped him in the hallway. "I heard about the stairwell incident," he said. Marcus nodded. "Just doing my job, sir?" "No," the prince corrected gently. "You're doing more than that. You're teaching all of us that sometimes the rules need to bend for the right reasons." As Marcus drove home that night, he thought about how close he had come to losing everything. How one moment of instinct had saved a life but cost him his career. How forgiveness and trust had brought him back. Sarah was waiting for him when he got home. Dinner ready. Their daughter doing homework at the table. Normal life? Beautiful, ordinary life. "How was work, Dad?" his daughter asked. Marcus hung up his coat and smiled. "Quiet, just the way I like it." 6 months later, Marcus received a commendation for his service. Not for catching the intruder, though that was mentioned, but for demonstrating the kind of judgment and instinct that went beyond protocol, for proving that sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules. The prince himself presented the award. In his speech, he spoke about trust, about forgiveness, about the importance of seeing the people around you as more than their job titles. Captain Reed made a choice that night. The prince said to the assembled guards and staff, he chose to trust his instincts over his orders. And in doing so, he saved my life. But more than that, he taught me something invaluable. He taught me that the greatest loyalty isn't blind obedience. It's having the courage to do what's right, even when it's hard. Even when it costs you everything. Marcus stood at attention, the metal heavy on his chest, and realized that being fired had been the best thing that ever happened to him. Not because it felt good. It didn't. But because it had forced both him and the prince to confront what really mattered. Not perfection. Not flawless adherence to rules, but trust, forgiveness, the recognition that we're all human, all capable of mistakes, and all deserving of second chances. Years later, when Marcus finally retired, the prince attended his farewell ceremony. They shook hands one last time, and in that moment, both men understood. That rainy night when everything fell apart had actually been the night everything came together, because sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the most important lessons. And sometimes being fired on the spot is the beginning of something better than you ever imagined.